There have been a lot of collapses throughout the history of the NFL, and I'd be here all day if I listed every single one of them, from the 2023 Jacksonville Jaguars to the 2008 Denver Broncos to the 1994 Philadelphia Eagles to everything in between. However, one of the collapses that seems to have been forgotten about all these years later is a collapse that took place in 1975 with this team right here, the Detroit Lions. It's probably easy to forget that collapse because it seemed like the Lions were hovering around 500 literally every single season in the mid-1970s. And seriously, I'm not exaggerating, as from 1973 to 78, the most wins they had in a season was 7, and the fewest wins they had in a season was 6. So you knew what you were getting on a yearly basis with this team. So when you look at the 1975 season and see that the Lions won 7-7, you probably don't even bat an eye. However, the 1975 Lions had quite the downfall. 9 weeks into the 1975 season, and they were 6-3. They were riding high on a 3-game winning streak. They had one of the best defenses in the conference. They had swept their biggest rival in the Green Bay Packers. And while they weren't going to win the division, as the Minnesota Vikings were 9-0 and running away with the NFC Central, they were in a prime position to make the playoffs, so long as they didn't completely choke the season away. Yeah, that did not happen, because the Lions would proceed to lose 4 of their final 5 games to drop to 7-7, as they ended the season without a winning record, despite being 3 games above 500 right around Thanksgiving. And while some of the losses were against teams that were better than them, a handful of them were against teams that were below 500, and were nowhere close to making the playoffs. The Lions just completely crapped themselves down the stretch. They went from a team with a positive point differential to a team with a negative one. They went from a team with a competent offense to a team that couldn't find the end zone, including a nationally televised debacle on Thanksgiving against the Los Angeles Rams, where they were shut out and didn't score a single point. And they went from a team with playoff aspirations to a team with none, as this would be the 5th straight season and the 17th time in the last 18 years that the Lions would be kept out of the postseason. And if you want to know how bad things got, and how the end of the 1975 season for the Lions truly was Murphy's Law in action, let's just say that prior to one of their losses in that stretch, one of their players got injured in the dumbest way possible. Because what if I said that The Who, as in the British rock band that will go on and play the Super Bowl halftime show 3.5 decades later, actually played a part in hampering Detroit's season? It's a crazy story that half a century later deserves a deep dive today. Because if you ever want to know what someone means when they say the phrase, "when it rains, it pours," this is that phrase in action right here. Because this is the story behind one of the dumbest injuries in the history of the Detroit Lions franchise, and how The Who seriously impacted the Lions' 1975 season and contributed to their collapse. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you might not have heard about before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for joining the community. And with that in mind, let's talk about how the 1975 season for the Detroit Lions, in the most unexpected way possible, quickly became a teenage wasteland. Before I talk about what exactly transpired, we need some context to understand who this man right here is, because he's going to play a rather infamous part in our story. You're not seeing any highlights of him as a member of the Detroit Lions, and there's a good reason for that. This man right here is tight end John McMacken, and he was drafted in the 3rd round of the 1972 NFL Draft by the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think it's fair to say that McMacken's 3 seasons with the Steelers were a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, he made it onto the All-Rookie team in 1972, and started 27 out of a possible 28 games over his first 2 seasons. And he made some absolutely critical plays for Pittsburgh that contributed to their success over the first part of the decade. He played a role in the Immaculate Reception, albeit a highly controversial role with his blocking. He scored the go-ahead touchdown in the fourth quarter of a 1973 game, oddly enough, against the Detroit Lions, as this touchdown broke a 10-10 deadlock and helped the Steelers win their season debut. And in a critical game against the Cleveland Browns in 1972, in a game that the Steelers needed to win in order to win the division, he had 3 catches for 113 yards and a touchdown, and helped the Steelers blow out the Browns to put them in the driver's seat for the division title with 2 games to go. So that was the good news with McMacken. The bad news was that by 1974, he was barely playing, as not only was Larry Brown playing well at tight end, but so was Burt Grossman, who came out of nowhere to overtake McMacken on the depth chart. Because of this, the Steelers had no room for McMacken entering the 1975 season, and decided to trade him to the Detroit Lions in exchange for a future draft pick. 1 year after winning the Super Bowl, albeit not doing a whole lot, McMacken was now on a different team and was in Detroit. And one of the interesting things about Detroit heading into the 1975 season, and one of the interesting things for this man right here in John McMacken, is that they had a brand new stadium. The 1974 season was the last one for the Lions at Tiger Stadium, as in 1975, they were going to be moving into the Pontiac Silverdome, one of the first indoor venues in the National Football League, and what was supposed to be a state-of-the-art facility. And when you've got a new venue and a climate-controlled venue, this means that you can attract major events all year long and attract big-time concerts. And man, did the Silverdome attract a big one, because on December 6, 1975, one day before the Lions were set to travel on the road to take on the Chicago Bears, the Silverdome was going to host its first ever concert. That concert? None other than one of the biggest rock bands in the world, The Who. This concert by The Who was absolutely legendary, as this was one of their first ever stadium shows. And man, was it a successful one, as this concert still lives on today as one of the greatest concerts ever by the band, and as one of the most iconic rock concerts of the 1970s, with the Silverdome, known at the time as Pontiac Stadium, selling out over 75,000 seats. For those of you who don't know who The Who are, allow me to briefly explain, because the British group is one of the biggest rock bands of all time. Won't Get Fooled Again might be the greatest album closer of all time. Baba O'Reilly is an absolute staple of rock with one of the greatest and most iconic intros ever. Other songs, like I Can See for Miles, See Me, Feel Me, Pinball Wizard, and Squeezebox, were top 20 hits on the Billboard Hot 100 at the time that the show was performed. In fact, if you're watching as of this video getting released, The Who are still touring today, 60 years later after they first formed, even if this is their retirement tour, and the band is obviously not what it once was. Long story short, The Who are massive. There is a reason that the band, even if they were way past their prime, and even if the show wasn't any good, headlined the Super Bowl halftime show in February of 2010. And while the Silverdome would host many iconic concerts over the years, The Who was the first. And when you're the first concert, there's going to be some, shall we say, hiccups in terms of getting the stadium ready. Maybe some things aren't going to be configured properly, or maybe some wires aren't going to be in the right place, or something along those lines. And in setting up the concert, and in recircuiting the power lines, things went completely haywire. The Lions were using the venue on Thursday, December 3rd, just 3 days before they were going to take on the Chicago Bears in what was a must-win game to keep their playoff hopes alive, as a loss would drop them to 6-6 and practically eliminate them from playoff contention. Remember that back in 1975, only 4 teams in each conference made the playoffs. While the Lions were practicing indoors, the workers were reconfiguring the wires for the concert. And when the wires were being reconfigured, the power went out. All of the lights at the Silverdome just stopped working. Someone screwed up along the way, and now the Lions were practicing completely in the dark. And what this meant was that the Lions were dressing themselves in the locker room and whatnot, and when they were doing it by flashlight and candlelight. No, I am not kidding. Here was an NFL team fighting for a playoff spot in the mid-1970s, and they were forced to do everything by using literal candles and flashlights, all because of this concert right here and the wiring screwing everything up. But okay, as bizarre as that is, how on earth does that relate to the man I mentioned earlier in the story, tight end John McMacken? Well, because when you're doing things in the dark, I think it's fair to say that sometimes you can't see all that well, and you might do some damage to your body that you wouldn't otherwise do. Think of it like when you go to the bathroom late at night and there are no lights on. You're more inclined to stub your toe or run into something because you can't see what you're doing. Because with trainers working in the dark trying to tape up the players, and with the players trying to put their equipment on in the dark, John McMacken got injured. Because there were no lights on in the venue, John McMacken ended up cutting his eye. McMacken had already done nothing with the Lions thus far in 1975. He had just 2 catches for 43 yards and no touchdowns, so it wasn't exactly the best of years for him already. And now, his highlight of the season and his most infamous moment was getting his eye cut open because he couldn't see what he was doing because he was working in the dark because of a wiring issue for a concert by The Who. As head coach Rick Forzano said on all of this, and said on the concert by the British group, we had our Christmas play early this year. You stay with this team long enough, and everything will happen. Understatement of the century right there. You stay with the Lions long enough, and you're bound to see some crazy things happen. Like your tight end injuring his eye because he couldn't see anything. And in case you were wondering, to the surprise of absolutely no one, yes, this incident involving The Who and the Blackout at the Silverdome was a really bad omen for what was going to happen with the Lions in Week 12. Again, this was a must-win game for Detroit. They were at 6-5. They had no shot at the division. And the Dallas Cowboys were 8-3, and they were in the wild card spot right now. So if the Lions lost this game, they were done. You would think, though, that this wouldn't be an issue, seeing as they were playing the Chicago Bears. And the Bears were having one of their worst seasons in franchise history. The Bears were 2-9. They boasted the worst defense in the NFC, having allowed 307 points thus far, or 28 points per game. They had the worst point differential in the entire NFL, having been outscored by 203 points. They had lost 3 straight, had lost 8 of their last 9, and when the Lions played the Bears earlier in the season, it wasn't even close, as the Lions dominated and won the game by a final score of 27-7. So this game should be easy, right? Nope. Because the Chicago Bears pulled off the upset, cementing one of the most embarrassing collapses in the history of the Detroit Lions franchise. And the Bears won the game by a final score of 25-21. Detroit quarterback Joe Reed completed just 42% of his passes. The Lions allowed Walter Payton to find the end zone twice. The Lions turned it over 3 times, and they had no answers whatsoever for stopping Bears wide receiver Bo Rather, who had 4 catches for 123 yards and was torching the Lions deep all day long in what was by far the best game of his entire NFL career from a yardage standpoint. Even though the Lions were heavy favorites to win this one, that did not matter on this day, as the Bears basically ended their season in an outcome that was entirely predictable based on what happened with The Who, the practice by candlelight, and the insane injury to John McMacken that occurred as a result. When it rains, it pours. This concert by The Who was legendary in more ways than one. It was a legendary moment for the band, as it truly cemented their status as rock and roll icons in the United States. It was a legendary moment for the Pontiac Silverdome, as it was the first concert there and set the stage for many more over the years. And it was also legendary because of how it impacted the Detroit Lions, as it led to one of the most bizarre injuries you'll ever see in NFL history. Can't say there are too many injuries throughout the sport's history where a player gets his eye cut because he can't see anything due to a power outage caused by a concert. But here we are. John McMacken's one season with the Lions was a memorable one in all the worst ways. I'll put it that way. Because in 1975, while the Who could see for miles, John McMacken most definitely could not. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.